Hello 9-1. I've created this video on Surds to prepare you for our work on this topic next term. I'm going to go through the basics now so that in class we can look at more challenging questions. All you need to do is listen carefully and answer the questions on your worksheet. However, you may also want to take notes in your book for later reference. So each slide will link to a question, so you may want to watch section 1 and then pause and answer question 1 on the worksheet before moving on, then section 2 and question 2 and so on. Okay, here we go. Right, before we move on to how to answer question 1, let's think about what a surd is. So you can see on the left hand side I've got some surds, they're under square root signs. If you look on the right hand side, we've got square root 9 equals 3. Square root of 9 gives us a whole number, a number that we can say what the answer is, so this is not a surd. Underneath that you can see the cube root of 64, and you should know that that's 4. Again, that's not a surd because we can cube root this number and get an answer. However, if you look to the left, square root of 12, do we know a number that times itself makes 12? No. If you put square root 12 into your calculator, and you may want to try this now, what you'll get is a long decimal. And it's not very easy to write it like that, especially if we want to perform calculations with it. So we leave it under the root sign, and this is called a surd. So moving on to question 1. Sometimes you're asked to simplify a surd. So looking at square root 12, what you need to do is come up with a pair of factors that multiply to make 12. But one of the factors needs to be a square number, and it needs to be the biggest square number that goes into 12. So obviously 1 goes into 12, but I want the biggest square number that goes into 12, and that's 4. And to get 12, we have to multiply 4 by 3. Now, if we split that up into two surds, I've got square root 4 times square root 3. And you should know that square root 4 is 2. And so I've got 2 square root 3 as my answer. Next, I want to look at square root 32. So, thinking about square numbers that multiply to make 32, I could say 4 goes into 32 8 times. However, that's not the biggest square number that goes into 32. The biggest square number that goes into 32 is 16, and it's multiplied by 2 to make 32. Again, you need to split this into two surds. So it's square root of 16 times square root of 2. The square root of 16 is 4, and you've got square root 2 there. So that is how to answer the questions in question 1. So if you want to pause now, you might want to do that now before you forget, or you might want to make any notes in your book on that to help you. Okay, so moving on to question 2. This time you are adding and subtracting surds. So if we look at the first example on the left, I've got 4 square root 3 plus 2 square root 3. Now, if you look on the right, you might remember when we collected like terms in algebra. Okay, so if I had 4a, add 2a, all I do is work out how many a I've got. I've got 6a. It's exactly the same with surds. Here I've got 4 lots of square root 3 plus another 2 lots of square root 3. So in total, I've got 6 lots of square root 3. Next one, I've got 4 square root 5 plus 3 square root 2. Now, this is crucial. You can only add or subtract when you've got the same surd. So, looking on the right again, remember when we did things like 4a plus 3b? These are different, they're not like terms, so we cannot join them together. All we could do in that case is leave it as 4a plus 3b. So all we can do on the left-hand side is leave it as 4 square root 5 plus 3 square root 2. There's nothing we can do to simplify that. Last one is important because you need to always check whether it's adding or subtracting. So we've got 9 square root 2, take away 3 square root 2. We've got 9 lots of square root 2, take away 3 lots, so we've got 6 lots of square root 2 left. Right, looking at question 3, hopefully what you're thinking is, why has Miss given me these questions when she's just told me that I can't add or subtract when they're not the same surd? Well, there's a trick, and the trick is that you have to change one or both of the surds until they do have the same surd. Let me show you what I mean. What you need to do is remember what we did in question 1. So square root 8 I can simplify. I know that the square number, the highest square number that goes into 8 is 4, and it's 4 times 2, and then I've still got my plus square root 2 here. I can split that into square root 4 times square root 2, and I've still got my plus square root 2 on the end. And then I can square root that 4 to get 2 square root 2 plus square root 2 is still on the end. So what I've done is use my knowledge from question 1 to simplify one of the surds. So square root 8 is now 2 square root 2. And now I've got 2 square root 2 plus 1 square root 2. So in total I have 3 square root 2. Okay, so what you're doing is looking to see if you can simplify one of those surds until you have the same surd in each term. So in this case, I've got square root 2 in each term by the end. Right, next one. I want to simplify my square root 50. So I need to think about what square numbers go into 50 and what is the highest square number that goes into 50. And you should realise that that is 25. And you have to times it by 2 to get 50. Okay, and then I've still got my 3 square root 2 on the end. If I split that up, I've got square root 25 times square root 2, and then take away 3 square root 2. And if I square root that 25, I've got 5 lots of square root 2, take away 3 lots of square root 2, and you should know that 5 square root 2 take away 3 square root 2 is 2 square root 2, because I've got 5 of something, I take away 3 of it, and now I've got 2 of it. Okay. Okay, so the last question, question 4, is on multiplying, but I'm also going to go through dividing because you will need to know that for the topic, okay? So what we're basically doing is the reverse of what we did in question 1. So the first one we've got here on the left is square root 2 times square root 2. All you need to do is put that all under the same square root, multiply them together, and you get square root 4. Now, sometimes we're going to leave it like that, but in this case, you should know that square root 4 is 2, so the simplest answer you can give is 2. Okay, next one. Again, if you're multiplying, all you do is put it under the same root. Okay, so I've got square root 8 times 5. 8 times 5, hopefully you know, is 40. But again, this time I can simplify that because I know that a square number goes into 40. The highest square number that goes into 40 is 4. So I can split that into 4 and 10. So I've got square root 4 times square root 10. And square root 4 is 2. So I've got 2 square root 10. Now, you would need to fully simplify it to get full marks in most cases, so it's always important that you check whether you can simplify your surd. In this last case, we've got square root 2 times square root 3, so again, we'll put it under the same root, and square root of 2 times 3 is 6, and we can look at that and we can say, is there a square number that goes into 6? The only one would be 1. And if we split it into 1 and 6, we'd just end up with square root 6 again at the end. And there's no higher square number that goes in, so we're done. square root 6 is our answer. So you can see here there's 3 different cases of how you would treat the surd. All you need to do is check whether you can simplify it. Okay, so going on to the right hand side, it's very similar. All you do is put it all under the root, but this time it's divide. So I've got square root of 20 divided by 2 is square root 10. Is there a square number higher than 1 that goes into 10? No, so we are done. Down here, I've just got another way that they might write it. So they've written it as a fraction, but this line you should know means divide. So I've got square root 21 divided by square root 7. Just put it all under the root sign. So I've got the square root of 21 divided by 7. I've got the square root of 3. And again, I can't simplify this because the only square number that goes into 3 is 1, and that would leave it the same. So there we go, that's it. That's all of your sections. Hopefully you know exactly what you're doing now. If not, you might want to go back, watch it again. And that's it, we're done. Have a lovely holiday.